Greetings and welcome aboard Zach Back's Carousel of Theme Parks podcast. Now, most carousels just go round and round without getting anywhere, but on this one, we'll be talking theme parks. And now, here's your host, Zach Back. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Carousel of Theme Parks podcast. On this week's episode, we're going to be talking about the history of Knott's Berry Farm. Now, it's been a few weeks since we last ended our first season, which I've decided that each season will be 6 episodes of history, and then a usual few chit-chats thrown in. So, I apologize for the couple-week delay there, but there's been a lot going on in my life, so I've had to take a moment just to step away, and then also Thanksgiving rolled around. It's just that time of year when things get crazy, and it's really hard to keep up with like a regular schedule. So naturally, I've actually been working on this episode for a little while. I've been reading the books about it because I've been going into doing an episode on this theme park, specifically on Knott's Berry Farm. I wanted to make sure that I had a good kind of introduction to what it was because I find that that's super important for this theme park and for understanding these parks. If I have a book that I can read about the park, it's best to do that before I get into the research. So we're going to dive right on in to the research or into the history of Knott's Berry Farm. I hope you enjoy, and then just visit me after this the history portion, and we'll chat some about the park and my personal thoughts on it. So we'll see you in a few moments. Along the side of Beach Boulevard in Buena Park, California, lies one of America's oldest theme parks. Some may say it is the oldest and the first, but regardless of this, the park has been serving up smiles and chicken dinners since its inception. Let's discover the history of Knott's Berry Farm, as well as one of America's most favorite oranges, the boysenberry. In December of 1920, 31-year-old Walter Knott drove his overloaded Ford Model T 200 miles south from Shandon, California to Buena Park, California. After a rough go at a homestead attempt on some new land in Newberry Springs in the Mojave Desert, and some good luck in Shandon, California, when Walter and his wife Cordelia landed a deal to supply vegetables to ranch cowboys, foremen and their families, and could sell the surplus, Walter found out about a deal on some land to farm in Buena Park from his cousin Jim Preston. Preston had been growing berries since 1905 in Glendora and partnered with his brother John on a berry venture in Buena Park. Their neighbor, William H. Coffrin, owned 40 acres just off Grand Avenue and was willing to rent the land. Preston offered the land opportunity to his cousin Walter Knott, who took him up on the proposition. Walter made the deal with Coffrin on a handshake to rent 25 acres at $50 an acre for 5 years. After the deal was done, Walter began cultivating the land, first by plowing up Coffrin's original alfalfa fields and planting berries, melons, sweet potatoes, and corn, all of which Walter would peddle in Buena Park, Anaheim, and Fullerton. The years were hard, and so were the profits, as during the 1921, all of Walter's crops were damaged by frost. According to Walter's daughter, Virginia, "Once Dad had promised me a piano from the berry crop profits. When the frost killed the crop, he came in and told me the weather froze the keys off the piano." Walter began looking for a way to get ahead, a berry that was superior to the others. In those early days, Walter began with the advanced blackberry, then the young berry, and he used his self-promotion prowess to promote these new berries. In 1923, Walter's partnership with Jim Preston expanded to 35 acres. He built a roadside stand along Grand Avenue, which was little more than a dusty dirt road at the time. The stand itself was simply a lean-to with palm fronds, recalled early farm employee Gertrude Osborne. It was a way for Knott to sell his products and earn extra money from passers-by on the way to Huntington and Newport beaches. They used a cigar box to hold the cash. After Cordelia came up with a novel idea to line the berry baskets in newspapers to make the produce more appealing, they were outselling the competition. But the Knotts were still renters by 1927, when the handshake agreement ended with Coffrin. At this time, Walter was determined to buy the land outright and entered into a new agreement to purchase the land at $1,500 an acre, with 10 acres total. By 1928, with the deed in hand, Walter used his savings to build a home for his family attached to Knott's Berry Place, an 80-foot-long business frontage on Grand Avenue. The south end housed a nursery to sell berry plants. Next door was the berry market, and on the north end was the tea room, where Cordelia sold sandwiches, rolls, jam, and fresh berry pie, all served by the Knott children. There were 5 tables, but the thought was if they could get a customer to come inside, rest a while, and try some of Cordelia's home cooking, the customer would surely take home more. Folks stopped at Walter's new eye-catching and substantial roadside stores. The stores ran mostly seasonally, with most clientele visiting in the summertime, and by the end of September, they would close the tea room all winter. Operating year-round was not important, as Cordelia asserted that she was not going into the restaurant business. As the Great Depression approached in 1929, land prices dropped and Walter bought 10 more acres, with the promise to pay. Knott's Berry Place was not yet a success, but the family was surviving in an era where others were losing everything. In 1932, George M. Darrow made a call to the Berry Place to track down a man named Rudolph Boysen. Rudolph Boysen was living in Anaheim and serving as superintendent of parks, but had been an amateur farmer. 10 years before, he was living and farming a small piece of land in Napa County, where he liked to experiment and create new berry hybrids by cross-pollinating blossoms and saving the seeds. One day, likely in 1923, he cross-pollinated a loganberry, blackberry, and a raspberry. Boysen later scattered these seeds near a creek on his property and promptly forgot about them. Years later, a neighbor knocked on his door and asked, "What are those great big berries down by the creek?" Boysen investigated to find that these seeds had produced plants with berries larger and sweeter than blackberries, at about 2 inches long. After this initial discovery, he moved the plant to Anaheim to his in-laws' orange grove on Orangethorpe Avenue. Boysen began showing these berries around the rare plant market and began selling these plants. Sales were negligible and forgotten by all but one man, George M. Darrow. By 1932, Darrow finally visited to see about these plants, but they had been long forgotten and figured he would ask at Knott's Berry Place, since Walter seemed to know a thing or two about berries. Walter suggested to look Boysen up in the telephone book, and they ended up meeting with Boysen at the original site near the creek where Boysen first threw the seeds, and with permission, Walter took cuttings of the plant and planted them on some plots set aside on his farm for experimental plants. A year later, at harvest, Knott knew he had something big, literally. The plants produced, and most of Boysen's berries measured at least 1.5 inches long. They were so fat that Knott had to sell them in 1-pound baskets, as they dwarfed the standard half-pound berry basket. 60 berries filled a pound basket when it usually took 2 to 3 times as many blackberries to do the same. By 1934, Walter began to reap the crop, with over 100 vines of the berries and 2,200 baskets of the berry. Cordelia's tea room also profited with the monster berry, since customers loved her 10-inch wide, 3-pound deep dish pies and brought them whole or by the slice. Knott could have easily named the berry after himself, but instead he named it the boysenberry in honor of its creator. As a result of its popularity, Knott began to sell the vine as rootstock and offering it for customers all over the globe. It's safe to say that every boysenberry plant in the world is descended from Walter Knott's farm in Buena Park, California. With the success of the boysenberry still on the horizon, the Knotts weren't earning enough money in 1934 to pay their debts. Due to this, Cordelia Knott had one of her many brainstorms. Add fried chicken dinners to jazz up the menu at the tea room. One night in June, Cordelia fried up some local poultry and served 8 chicken dinners on her best wedding china, complete with salad with rhubarb sauce, hot biscuits, vegetables, mashed potatoes, gravy, and a berry pie with ice cream for dessert. The same meal is still served on this day at the farm. Home cooked by Mrs. Knott, this dinner would set a diner back 65 cents. According to Walter Knott, in a few weeks, why the place was full of people, at least on weekends, that was really the turning point in our economic life. With the dinners, we had hit upon something that was enough and that people could afford to drive out for. People made a little occasion of going somewhere to dinner. Cordelia's Tea Room began to acquire local customers and folks from as far away as Pasadena and Glendale. The restaurant was like the farm itself, a family affair. Russell Knott would go to catch chickens, Walter would clean them, Cordelia would fry the chicken, daughters Tony and Virginia would serve, and the youngest daughter, Marion, would bust the dishes. By the next year, seating grew from 20 to 40, and then in 1936 grew to 70. After the demands of not only this new venture, but the farm itself continued to grow, the family began to hire locals to help. In 1936, the average number of dinners sold on the weekends was 620 a day. By Thanksgiving in 1937, the total jumped to 1,774. The tea room began year-round operation in 1937, but guests still waited far too long to be served, with waits nearing 3 to 4 hours to be sat. Walter began looking to expand further and expanded the dining room to seat 350, and the line still stretched for blocks down Grand Avenue. Later on, to augment her income, Virginia Knott set up a table in the lobby of the dining room to display small novelties and gifts for sale, the farm's first gift shop. By the time of the next restaurant expansion in 1938, Virginia had her own store, a small gift shop at the end of the main dining room. Although she was a family member, Virginia was the farm's first concessionaire. As the restaurant's popularity continued to grow, so did the popularity of the farm's other markets and the needs for further expansion of the restaurant. Even though it had just been expanded, the chicken dinner restaurant would sell more than 265,000 dinners during this first full year of operation as an official restaurant. The demand for Cordelia's boysenberry pie was so high that within a few years the pie department was baking up to 500 a week and 800 plus on Sundays. To better manage the larger number of waiting guests, a hostess would hand a slip to each group noting the approximate wait time. A loudspeaker system scattered around the farm would typically give guests 3 chances to answer the call. Due to the need to keep people busy during this long interval, Walter began purchasing things and building things around the farm for guests to explore. Starting with antique music boxes, then a rock garden with 15 tons of volcanic rocks from Death Valley, Walter continued to attempt to keep people happy while waiting to dine at the restaurant. As the restaurant expanded yet again to 600 seats, Walter wanted to cover up an unsightly pipe around his garden area and build a volcano from the leftover rocks from his rock garden, as well as some other restful tableaus in order to make the garden area more inviting. As the volcano was completed, they built a small stone house at the bottom, where Old Nick, a carved wood devil, turned a crank and occasionally brought the volcano to life with an erupting sound effect and neon tubes within the cone to simulate fire at night. According to Walter, this frivolous addition was entertaining, and that if something interests or amuses us, it's probably interest or amuse others. This began what would eventually turn into an enterprise. Walter Knott visited the California Pacific International Exchange in San Diego in 1935, and it changed his life. He visited Gold Gulch, a western mining town said to recreate the heyday of the 49ers. After this experience, Walter had a model made of a western town and announced at an employee's birthday party that he wanted to build something like the model at the farm one day. Slowly, Walter began amassing a collection of Western memorabilia as he began creating a small mining town of his own as a homage to the past and his grandmother, who had crossed the desert in a covered wagon in 1868. The Western settlement he was planning for the farm would be a tribute to her, as well as a way to express the sacrifices made by the pioneers of the Old West. Beginning in late 1940, Walter began building a space on the farm for the cyclorama, which was a large and concave environmental painting designed to envelop viewers from the new remnants of an old Junction hotel from Prescott, Arizona. Walter continued by traveling through California and buying aged sheds, buggies, tools, and pieces of buildings to bring back to the farm. From late 1940 to mid-1941, they constructed a small street lined with buildings evocative of the Old West. beginning with a pack train outfitter's shop, the offices of the Ghost Town News, an assay office, and a tribute to an obscure miner, Desert Jim. The Silver Dollar Saloon served boysenberry punch in place of whiskey. Goldie's Place was copied from an old building in Bodie, and is instantly recognizable as a house of ill repute, with a woman's leg hanging and kicking from a second-floor window. Besides Ghost Town's sentry, Soldado Jose, Knott's little village was peopled by life-size sculptures by self-taught artist Andy Anderson. Inside, comical tableaux were created within the sheriff's office, barbershop, and Hop Wings Lee's Chinese laundry. Behind Goldie's Place stood a replica of an old jail in Oatman, Arizona, and Anderson was asked to create a horse thief to occupy it. With bloodshot eyes, Anderson's wooden sculpture of Sad-Eye Joe balefully gazed at visitors through the bars of his prison, while an unseen employee acted as his voice and dispensed amazing personal information about Joe's unsuspecting guests. Construction of this little patchwork town was completed by mid-1941. At the far end of Knott's new Main Street, an old windmill from Riverside County was located next to an aged livery stable, which was as far as Walter thought his little development would ever go. At this point, many newspapers dubbed the place Ghost Town Village. By the end of 1941, Walter had spent more than $12,000 on the venture, yet insisted the attraction remain free of charge. "It's not half as full a thing as it seems. When the customers pile up so that we can't seat them, the girls send them out to see the ghost town or to play with the volcano. They get so interested that I've had to install loudspeakers to call them back to dinner," said Walter Knott. By late 1941, additions were already being built, with the Little Chapel by the Lake, which was constructed of adobe with a mission bell and crumbling walls to frame it, and a painting of Christ that would open his eyes by Knott's new artist, Paul von Kleeman. The painting featured special paint that would transition from iridescent to fluorescent, magically making Christ's eyes appear to open. The cyclorama attraction finally opened in 1942 and was followed by the Covered Wagon Show as free attractions within the ghost town. Given these additions, the farm began to become what we see as a theme park in 1941 to 1942. World War II had a major impact on the farm as several expansions were paused, and the focus went to keeping them in business. Rations began, and the chicken dinner restaurant had to limit diners to 1 cup of tea or coffee. But the war did not keep visitors away. So by 1942, Walter had new buildings added to the ghost town, a post office and the Wells Fargo building. Then, shortly after, the Bottle House and the music hall. Slowly, Walter Knott had created an inevitable tourist attraction in Buena Park, making Knott's Berry Place feel truly real with its historically accurate buildings and experiences. By 1946, an additional restaurant was opened called the Ghost Town Grill, later known as the Buffalo Steak Restaurant. This move was a critical step in expansion of the farm, and in 1947, Walter Knott officially changed the name of this growing park from Knott's Berry Place to Knott's Berry Farm, which remains to this day. From the very early origins of the park, filling the spaces with locations, attractions, or other things by concessionaires was the norm. The prospective concessionaire would talk to Walter Knott about an idea, and with a simple handshake agreement, Walter would either agree to allow the concession option or not. Ghost Town's numerous concessionaires provided guests with unique shopping options or even an adventurous family-oriented experience. Bill Higdon, a former insurance salesman, introduced a stagecoach line to the farm that ran through the still rural outskirts of the property. Higdon only had 2 horses and a covered wagon when he set up shop in 1949, but within 5 years he had a corral of 30 horses, a ticket depot, 4 stagecoaches, and a horse-drawn sprinkler wagon to temper the dusk along the trail. During the peak summer season, his concession would welcome more than 70,000 passengers a month, since his crew could load out 15 coaches every 29 minutes. By 1951, Walter Knott had hoped to finally add a railroad to his ghost town. He recalled, "I saw a picture in the paper about a motion picture company that had bought 2 trains and had to make a film of great train wreck with them. I thought we might go up there and we might buy enough to make one of good train out of the wreck." The Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad was eager to sell their rolling stock without any need to repair a wreck. They went to Colorado and bought the train and the parlor cars. After relocating the locomotives and cars to the park, they began converting the locomotive's soot-spouting coal and wood-burning engine to diesel fuel. The park officially opened the railroad in 1952 with a Golden Spike celebration for the Ghost Town and Calico Railway as the first televised grand opening of an attraction on the farm. Over the years, additional locomotives and train cars were purchased, including probably the strangest vehicle on the line, the Rio Grande Southern Galloping Goose, an odd hybrid of a truck engine and a train car, combined with the front of a Wainworks school bus body. Built in 1931, it was touted as a railroad motor car and hauled passengers and freight through the Colorado Rockies during the Depression years. By the next year, additional expansion occurred with School Road and the addition of the 1879 Little Red Schoolhouse. Also, the gristmill, barrel house, and box house were added. Boot Hill was added behind the gristmill with real tombstones. Walter Knott would find old grave sites and have the dilapidated stones replaced with new markers, taking the originals back to add to Boot Hill. Also around this period, Paul von Kleeman found the original berry stand from the farm in a warehouse and had it relocated into the park area near the Rose Garden, south of the steakhouse, and affixed a brass plaque honoring the Knotts onto a stone marker. Behind the plaque is a time capsule with the Knott's ephemera along with Chicken's wishbone. The ghosts of Ghost Town never were too obvious, but in 1954 they found a home in the Haunted Shack, a new attraction located in Calico Square. Its legend states that, long ago, a miner named Slanty Sam and his wife, Shaky Sadie, were living in an old shack in Esmeralda County, Nevada, long after the gold rush days had subsided. Those brave enough to come upon the old house swore the tall would shrink and the small would grow in size, all the while unseen hands were pushing them backwards away from the home. The attraction was a hit, and Walter Knott even got in on the act and claimed the spot the residents of this mysterious shack relocated to the park. Another major concessionaire that changed the park was Wendell Bud Hurlbut. Hurlbut was known for designing custom-made small-scale trains in 1943 and sold 12 of them in 3 years before installing one in his own kiddie park in El Monte. Oddly, one man would come to his park, sit on a bench, and study the rides. Hurlbut recalled, "I spoke with him and told him it looked like he was interested in the amusement park business. He said he was kind of looking into it. He was a really nice fellow, so I sat down with him and he asked about the rides." That man was Walt Disney. Walt later invited Hurlbut over to ride his miniature train at his home and invited him to Burbank to show off the proposed location for his little park beside the Disney studio. At that time, Hurlbut was also friendly with the Knott family and thought there might be an opportunity to sell a train ride or operate a carousel in Buena Park. Initially, Walter Knott gave him an immediate "no thank you." By early 1955, Hurlbut received a visit from Russell Knott, who wanted to look at Hurlbut's 1896 Densel Menagerie Carousel, which needed restoration. Walter had a change of heart and invited Hurlbut back to the farm as a concessionaire, where he brought the carousel to the old McDonald's farm area of the park. This business partnership would become a staple in the history of Knott's Berry Farm for many attractions for years to come. Walt Disney had been friendly with the Knott family for many years, and even had been invited to the inaugural run of the Ghost Town and Calico Railway in 1952. The following year, Disney's team came to Knott's and took a look at the farm's design and operations. Knott's Berry Farm had grown organically with no master layout, but art director Harper Goff was among Disney's guests who studied Ghost Town for inspiration and drew their own carefully rendered plans. Knott's respected Disney, but grew concerned about the looming possibility of Disneyland opening in the near city of Anaheim. Knott quickly ditched complacency and began handing out questionnaires to his patrons to find out what they wanted to see at the farm. Walter learned that guests desired more entertaining options at the farm, but loved the ghost town. Disney invited Walter and Cordelia to the opening day of Disneyland on July 17, 1955. Walter reminisced about the event in an interview. "Finally the day came around for Disneyland to open. Mrs. Knott and I had a golden pass to Disneyland. Walt had sent it over. After we had a bite of lunch, we were over there in the afternoon. I tell you, all the people in the world were there. They were just packed. We pushed around in the crowd, and we looked at all the wonderful things that he'd prepared there, and we thought it was terrific. And by the end of the afternoon, we began to think we better get home and send all our people home, because the customers were all at Disneyland. We came home and drove into the parking lot. There were lots of cars, and we came in and asked the kitchen. They said it had almost been a normal Sunday. We had the best year we'd ever had, and everyone since has been bigger than the year before. It just proves that maybe we needed some competition. After Disneyland opened, smaller attractions were added to Knott's Berry Farm, but not to compete with what was being done in the next city over, simply to add to the appeal of the farm itself. One such was added in 1960, when electronics expert Martin Pincus was able to create a shooting gallery that worked electronically with guns that emitted a light ray that fired at 186,000 miles per second. Nearby, history was about to be made at the park when Bud Hurlbut was asked to create another attraction, this time with his well-known train design. He dubbed his concept the Calico Mine Ride. It was to be a traditional dark ride with elements to show guests what miners endured back in the days of the Old West. The ride would be constructed in a 2-story building, and the ride vehicle would be a 4-seat car dispatched in groups of 4 at a time. By the end of construction, the building became a 7-story tall mountain with 6 50-passenger trains. Hurlbut purchased modern mining engines from General Electric and began to theme them in his shop to be 19th century steam locomotives. The attraction also employed one of the earliest uses of a hidden switchback queue, even surprising Walt Disney when he visited to experience the new ride. Later, this idea for a queue would be borrowed by Disneyland's art director for Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, Tony Baxter. The ride officially opened in November of 1960. Shortly after this attraction opened, Hurlbut was tasked with even more attraction concepts, as Walter Knott was impressed and broke his tradition of 1 concession per concessionaire. This theme would continue for several years after this. Meanwhile, Walter Knott admitted in a 1963 interview that he comparatively spends little time on the farm's work anymore, as Knott's focus had turned exclusively to the theme park itself. Across the street from the park, and on the other side of Beach Boulevard, Knott had owned quite a bit of land and had attempted to develop it. However, it was never as popular as his side of the street already was. Now, Walter Knott wanted to dive a little deeper into one of his other passions, politics. Knott had always loved patriotism and teaching others about the history of America, and wanted to create something that did just that. After a fall 1963 visit to Philadelphia and Independence Hall, he decided he wanted to build a full-scale replica of Pennsylvania's most famous building. He dispatched a team of designers to Philadelphia to photograph every detail of the original structure. Every chandelier, fixture, and hand-carved chair in the assembly hall was documented excessively. Every measurement of Knott's octagonal belfry matched the original, as did its 4 massive clock faces that each measured 10 feet in diameter. Knott also ordered 140,000 historically accurate handmade bricks, many of which still show the designs of the artisan's thumbprints. Hurlbut made a trip to Philadelphia and was allowed unprecedented access to the actual Liberty Bell in 1964, where he made careful measurements to replicate the bell. Once back in Buena Park, Hurlbut took the mold of the bell to the Buckeye Foundry in Los Angeles for casting, where he also attempted to replicate the crack in the bell. The new icon of Buena Park opened on July 4, 1966, with more than 2,000 guests and dignitaries in attendance. This realized Walter's dream of teaching visitors about the history of the nation. This moment was a turning point for the farm, as Walter began to relinquish control over new additions or decisions in the park to his children, and by 1967, he turned over operations of the ghost town to his daughter Marion. By then, the park's policy of free admission was becoming an anomaly in the theme park business. While Knott's Berry Farm sold individual tickets for its distinct shows and attractions, Disneyland and Pacific Ocean Park both charged a nominal admission fee on top of that. The free admission allowed youths to run amok and vandalize the park. Walter was against charging any admission or gating the park, but after Hurlbut's secretary told of her daughter being harassed by teenagers in Ghost Town, Walter changed his tune and turned his back when Marion and the rest of the family began fencing the park and charging $1 admission to enter the park. Some guests did not like this, but most breathed a sigh of relief. Once an admission fee was being charged, now the park needed to upgrade facilities to justify return visits and began new additions and changes. In January of 1969, the Knott family announced the construction of a new land, Fiesta Village, as a tribute to Mexico's cultural imprint on California. 1969 also saw the addition of the Calico Log Ride, which had been in development for years, so long that the original idea had been produced by Aero Development for Six Flags Over Texas and was seen as a success. Calico Log Ride opened with longtime friend of the Knotts, John Wayne, as the master of ceremonies. Cordelia Knott christened the first log with a bottle of boysenberry juice. The first riders were John Wayne, followed by Walter and Cordelia Knott, who were not usually interested in riding the attractions, but knew that Hurlbut's ride would be safe and fun. Hurlbut continued for well over a decade in offering new and amazing attractions as his concessions. In the years following, Marion Knott worked to open a new expansion to the park in 1971 with the Gypsy Camp. This area was not well received by visitors, but featured an arcade, gift shops, and John Wayne Theater, entertainment, and a space for a thrill ride, known as the Gypsy Spinner, but the ride itself would never be built. 1973 brought a new idea to the park, a seasonal event. The event would be known as Knott's Halloween Haunt. Occurring on one weekend in October, it would feature Seymour, the master of the macabre, and the park transformed to create the most haunted of Halloweens that you will ever experience. Ghost gunslingers in the ghost town, the Phantom of the Opera in the saloon, and so much more would create the haunted atmosphere of the event. The event was an instant hit, and by the next year, the event sold out nightly. The event would eventually be named Knott's Scary Farm in its third year. Beginning with a three-night run in 1973, the event now stretches over the fall season and welcomes its frightful but anxious guests from Seymour, Wolfman Jack, Weird Al Yankovic, the Crypt Keeper, and the sultry Elvira, Mistress of the Dark, who have hosted dance parties and elaborate musical reviews throughout the park. 1974 saw the death of the family's matriarch, Cordelia Knott. Her legacy and compassion continues to pulse through the park and its Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner restaurant to this day. By the end of 1974, the restaurant had served 30 million chicken dinners, and Knott's Ghost Town and Fiesta Village were drawing crowds and revenue. Time had run out, however, for the floundering Gypsy Camp. Decked out in a flapper-style dress, Marion Knott announced to the press that the area would be torn out for her third and biggest expansion, the Roaring Twenties amusement area, with opening set for 1975. The Gypsy Camp area was cleared by ripping out much of the rockwork and reusing the existing structures to create 20s-themed areas. Several new attractions were added, as well as the park's first roller coaster, the Corkscrew. Also opening just a few months after the inauguration of the new land, the park's first traditional dark ride, Knott's Berry Tales, made its debut. The roots of the beloved attraction stretch back to the faltering Gypsy Camp when artist Wally Huntoon was asked to upgrade the area. His embellishments never left the drawing board, but he began preliminary work on what would eventually become Knott's Berry Tales. It was envisioned as a little gypsy ride concerning a boy and his donkey journeying to the fair with his family. By the fall of 1974, former Disney Imagineer Raleigh Crump was brought in as a consultant. Initial sketches and models kept Wally's human characters, but they were slowly replaced with anthropomorphized frogs, owls, beavers, hares, and the Berry Tales bears. The attraction was ultimately set in the 1920s to suit the new Roaring Twenties landscape, but its various gypsies hung on despite the changes. As Crump was getting the attraction ready for its opening with the rest of the Roaring Twenties area, a suspicious fire broke out in March of 1975 and consumed 75% of the sets, props, ride system, and building, causing $3 million in damages. An undaunted Crump rallied with Marion Knott, and the ride eventually reopened in the July of 1975, becoming an instant favorite. As the Roaring Twenties area became an instant success, an addition was made to expand the area with the Roaring Twenties Airfield. Also, a steeplechase ride was being developed, but faced delays after issues occurred with the ride until it eventually opened in 1980 by Eddie Soto's redesigned ride with a tongue-in-cheek Wacky Soapbox Racers ride. Shortly before this, in 1978, the park opened a new ride in Fiesta Village with Montezuma's Revenge, a Schwarzkopf shuttle loop roller coaster. After 61 years of family ownership, the Knotts gave up their sovereignty in 1981 to a new general manager, Terry Van Gorder, a former executive of Magic Mountain. Immediately, Van Gorder made changes, including a pay-one-price policy, abandoning the ticket book model in favor of a simpler admission policy. Shortly after this change of leadership, the park's patriarch, Walter Knott, died in December of 1981. The next big change to occur happened in 1982, when Marion Knott called on Ron Misaker to solve the dilemma of capturing a wider audience for the park, notably children. Misaker found that a perfect contender would be the Peanuts, created by Charles Schulz. Misaker met with Schulz as an ice skating event after a business meeting to watch Schulz's daughter skate when Misaker convinced Schulz to allow Knotts to access his Peanuts characters on one condition: his daughter could skate in the Knott's Berry Farm ice rink as Snoopy. The deal marked a landmark moment in the park's history and showcased a key moment of its expansion with the building of Camp Snoopy, an area of the park that was previously a wooded parking area. Eddie Soto worked to create spaces that truly complemented the Peanuts stories within Knott's Berry Farm, and it worked. Shortly after this point, in 1987, Knott's Berry Tales was closed for a new venture. The numerous characters and props were placed in storage for a new ride, Kingdom of the Dinosaurs. This new attraction would capture the imaginations of new generations of fans with a 7-minute journey through time with drastic temperature changes and animatronic figures of dinosaurs. The ride rode the zeitgeist of a natural resurgence of an interest in the creatures and was credited with improving Knott's Berry Farm's attendance by 18% within the first year. By the next year, the park offered a new raft ride, Bigfoot Rapids, which was a take on Eddie Soto's original attraction when he was hired with Knott's, Flash Flood Rapids. The Corkscrew coaster was removed in 1989 to make room for Boomerang, a Vekoma steel coaster, the following year in 1990. Also in 1990, Knott's Berry Farm celebrated 50 years of the Ghost Town, and in 1994, an expansion of the Ghost Town was built with a new Native American-themed space with the attraction Spirit Lodge. By 1995, another new roller coaster was added to Fiesta Village with Jaguar on the edges of Montezuma's Revenge. Also around the same time, the Roaring Twenties was rethemed to become the Boardwalk. Many attractions were lost or rethemed as the area began to change to become this new theme. Briefly, in 1997, Windjammer Surf Racers dual-track coaster rose in place of a Wacky Soapbox Racers, but then by 2000, Windjammer also ended its time at the park. 1997 saw the largest change, when the Knotts family sold the park to Cedar Fair, one of the leaders in regional theme parks from Sandusky, Ohio. The decision was made due to the deep pockets that many operators have that the Knotts family did not. When Cedar Fair took over, Knott's great history turned another corner. Change was on the horizon. More daring roller coasters were what the public craved, and Cedar Fair could provide the expertise and funding to bring such thrill rides to Knott's. It took no time at all for the new parent company to get started. First was the replacement of the XK1 attraction with Cedar Fair's Supreme Scream pylon, complete with a billboard like none other, with the Knott's name glowing from faint blue electric lights upon the tallest structure in Orange County, and became the world's tallest free-fall ride, offering 3 seconds of zero gravity. 6 months later, in 1998, Ghost Rider opened as the last project approved by the Knott family. Ghost Rider was designed by Custom Coasters International and would be known as one of the largest roller coasters west of the Mississippi. Since being acquired by Cedar Fair, the park has seen an aggressive shift towards thrill rides, beginning with Accelerator in 2002, a launched roller coaster by Intamin. 2004 saw the addition of Silver Bullet, a Bolliger and Mabillard inverted steel coaster on the side of the park's original lake and entrance area. 2004 also saw Kingdom of the Dinosaurs closed. 2013 saw a major refurbishment of the boardwalk area and a new steel Wild Mouse coaster added, Coast Rider. A new dark ride was finally announced in 2015 to replace Kingdom of the Dinosaurs, called Voyage to the Iron Reef, and developed by Triotech. 2018 saw the addition of Hang Time, a Gerstlauer roller coaster, to the boardwalk, and in the fall of 2019, the park announced that Knott's Berry Tales would return to the park as a new ride. Knott's Berry Tales returned to the fair, and would be developed by Triotech, who had previously developed the attraction before it. 2022 saw the closure of Montezuma's Revenge to become Montezuma, the Forbidden Fortress, by 2025. This attraction is yet to reopen as the recording of the podcast. 2024 saw the opening of Snoopy's Tenderpaw Twister Coaster in Camp Snoopy by Zamperla. As the book Knott's Preserved puts it, Knott's Berry Farm will forever grow and change with time and tourism, but with the certainty that the next generation will still be able to enjoy some of the same traditions millions of families have come to know and love. Since the Chicken Dinner restaurant served its first meal in 1934, more than 20 million people have dined in its many dining rooms, and long lines attest to its continuing appeal. Surely Walter and Cordelia Knott would be shocked by the amazing growth and longevity of the former farm as it reaches beyond its 100th anniversary. From boysenberry to theme park, Knott's Berry Farm remains an American original and an icon of Southern California pride. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed the history portion of this week's episode on Knott's Berry Farm. Now, I'm absolutely enthralled by the history of this place because I love boysenberry. I went to Knott's Berry Farm for the first time last year around the holiday season, where they turn into Knott's Merry Farm. I believe I neglected to mention that they do operate every so often during the holiday season as Knott's Merry Farm, where they kind of just, quietly changed their name to Knott's Berry Farm. But regardless of that, I really enjoyed my visit to Knott's Berry Farm. It was a beautiful park. It is a beautiful park, and I know that this is a fascinating history because I saw a lot of these things that I mentioned, like Sad-Eye Joe and Goldie's leg sticking out the window on the top of Goldie's place. Like those type of things, I remember seeing those things when I was in the park. And kind of learning about those history moments and those historical mementos was so fascinating. And knowing that I've been in the kitchen of Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner restaurant before, I've seen that it looks exactly like it does in the Knott's Preserved book. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me that this park is the way it is. This is the proof that a park built up organically over time can still operate successfully. And this park really has. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this park, but I also want to mention kind of the thought about America's first theme park. If we remember in our last episode, the finale of season 1, I talked about Holiday World and Splash and Safari. And Holiday World claims to be America's first theme park. Now, in technicality terms, it is the first singular theme park of probably in America, but it's not the first theme park. I don't know. There's a weird way. Because whenever I was looking into research this, I was keeping up with the kind of dates, the timelines. And it seems that when I would first consider Knott's Berry Place a theme park is about a few years earlier than when Santa Claus Land opened as where we now see Holiday World. So I would say that that's a factual, that it's an interesting thought and it's an interesting topic, and I really know that there's people out there that know more about it than I do, but I would say the first moment I consider the park a theme park because it had an attraction is in around 1941. That's whenever they started having the Cyclorama attraction in Knott's Berry Farm. So that was the first moment I would say it's a theme park because it has an attraction. Now, as it goes for when it has a ride, it's actually Holiday World beats them out with Santa Claus Land because Santa Claus Land opened with a couple rides. But the first ride that I can see in Knott's Berry Farm history was the Stagecoach. And that was in the late 40s. So it was a few years after Holiday World. However, I think, though, that what we consider today as a definition of a theme park which is a location that has themes and attractions, I would classify Knott's Berry Farm as being a theme park as early as 1941. But anyway, let's get out of the weeds of that. I just wanted to cover that for a moment because that's just an interesting fascination of mine, because I find it interesting that both theme parks consider themselves the first. I know there can only be one, and I mentioned it in the previous episode as well. It probably doesn't matter to anyone out there, but, this is a podcast that I write, that I create, and that I base off all my research, so I can say what I want sometimes. Regardless, let's talk about Knott's Berry Farm today. Now, much of the farm is still there. You can still visit Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner Restaurant, which is still in the same spot it always has been, and is still the same size as its last major expansion. It's still absolutely massive, and it serves the same chicken dinner that was known back in the whenever Mrs. Knott created the first one. It has the same food, same amazing. So if you ever go to Knott's Berry Farm, if you miss Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner Restaurant, you've made a grave mistake, because that is a part of the process of visiting this park, is going to that restaurant. Now, the park itself, I really enjoyed it because it feels so organic. It feels like as you walk, you're just going to keep discovering new things, especially if you walk towards the ghost town first. It feels like there's so many spaces within ghost town that is so organic. It feels like you can open a window and open a door and then find some new things. When you go into some of the shops, they feel so authentic, is the word I think I'm looking for. You see the infamous characters of the ghost town with Sad Eye Joe. You see the Catawampas. Now, I did not mention the Catawampas in this episode, but I've talked about it in a previous episode. But a Catawampas, it was a character created by Mr. Knott. He had it made as a character out of some logs and some sticks, and it just kind of sits there in front of the livery stable, and it's still there to this day, and it's just kind of become a thing because he put a plaque next to it that said, "This is a Catawampas." He named the thing that he made, and it's still there today. So there's lots of little things like that in the ghost town that I find really interesting and really kind of like amazing in a way that they still exist. And I love that. I really, truly love that Knott's Berry Farm has held on to those moments, because I can tell you that Cedar Fair as a company has kind of transformed a lot of the parks that it has taken. We talked about how it took Kings Island and transformed it. We're now talking about Knott's Berry Farm. It also purchased it, but I think Knott's Berry Farm is still a singular entity within the Cedar Fair brand within Six Flags today. I didn't even mention that Six Flags now owns it, but I've mentioned that before. You should know that fact. Nothing really has changed at Knott's Berry Farm since Six Flags took over, other than some leadership changes. I actually met the president of the park, and now he no longer is there. So, or at least this is the end of his time at Knott's Berry Farm at the end of the year, which is a very, very sad face for me, because he was a wonderful man. He kept the park up to kind of the dreams of the Knott family. So it really still maintained that kind of consistency within the park. I'm sure it will remain the same. Only some small changes will happen, or maybe future upgrades to the park or future maintenance, maybe change with the Six Flags kind of rename. But ultimately, the merger with Cedar Fair and Six Flags really didn't change much in the Cedar Fair parks, other than maybe just prices kind of matching some of Six Flags prices. So, curious. Regardless of that, the park is amazing. I really enjoy the ghost town, as I said, and there's so many things there. Now, I visited during Knott's Merry Farm, so they actually convert much of the streets of Ghost Town to be almost like a Christmas market, which is absolutely beautiful. They have different crafts all over, and it kind of brings back that history of concessionaires in the park, because it allows people from around Southern California to come over and go, we're going to sell some stuff here in the park. And Knott's is like, go for it. Here's your booth. They probably pay a bunch of money to be there, but regardless, it kind of brings that idea of concessionaires back to the park. Now, the concessionaires, I think I neglected to mention this in the actual history, but eventually the park bought out all of the kind of ownership rights of the concessionaires. So the idea of concessionaires no longer really operates within the park, except for during these kind of special events where they invite people from around to come in and sell their wares. But like actually having people come in and build attractions in the park is not a thing anymore. But that was the way that Walter Knott liked it. He did everything with a handshake agreement. Nothing was ever written down. It was just an agreement because Knott carried his word. And so that was really an interesting thought that I've ever considered, because you don't necessarily hear business transactions being handled by a handshake in modern world. And I don't think it could happen today. But Walter Knott ran the park a little bit differently. And you can see the results from that. Like, you can see how good of a space this is, how good of a park it ended up becoming. But I will say this area of the park is my favorite, though, the Ghost Town. I love Ghost Rider. I understand that Ghost Rider is actually, when they built Ghost Rider, this is when the volcano that I mentioned, the rock volcano and the little garden, that's when it was finally removed from the back of the chicken dinner restaurant. So that's a sad part, because that was the original attraction in the park. And so I kind of understand when people were mad, where fans were like, oh no, because they removed the volcano, because that was the original attraction in the park. Now, of course, things have changed over the years, and they needed space. And Knott's Berry Farm is a very interesting area, because it's kind of like quarantined in this little square area. They really can't go beyond that boundary. Now, they still have some expansion space they could take advantage of, but not a lot of it. So you also have the Knott's Hotel, which is right next door. I did read some about Knott's Hotel. It was a Radisson hotel originally, and then Cedar Fair purchased it before they bought the park and was running it as a Radisson, but they owned it. And now, because Cedar Fair also owns the park renamed it to the Knott's Hotel, and it runs under the Knott's Hotel under kind of the Radisson theming, which is it's an interesting caveat there of how that works. But I stayed at the Knott's Hotel when I was there, and I loved it because it continued that kind of idea of boysenberry everything right outside the park. And the park itself has so many boysenberry offerings, I can't get over it. It's a lovely flavor. If you've never had a boysenberry anything, I highly recommend that you try it when you visit. And definitely visit the park. Now, other areas of the park, the next area would be the boardwalk, which kind of transitions from this like old style. It's the old Roaring '20s area where the Knott's Berry Tales ride is now, which is still a wonderful attraction, but I find it so interesting they decided to take out the Knott's Berry Farm attraction, Knott's Berry Tales, the original that was designed by Raleigh Crump, and replace it with a dinosaur ride. When I read that, I said, what? That's crazy. Why was everyone obsessed with dinosaurs? I mean, I love dinosaurs, but I also love dark rides that are really classic. So it's interesting. I wonder if any of the major props were ever reused in the new attraction. I don't know. I'm going to have to look that up some more. I do have a book on Knott's Berry Tales, so I'm going to keep looking into that one. That's another book on its side. Like, I could write a whole nother podcast episode about just the ride, because there's an entire thick coffee table book written. So this is on the history of the park as a whole, so I didn't want to dwell too long on the ride, but it's a fascinating ride nonetheless, and I will continue to do some research on that and invite you to do the same. But this area is really interesting because you can definitely tell it wasn't designed to be this way, and I never really realized that, but this was the original shape of the gypsy camp area of the park. So I can't wait to go back and kind of compare that design now to my own like recollection of what it looks like. That's interesting. Another staple right next around the park, if we're going in like a clockwise fashion, is the Ghost Town and Calico Railroad. I really think this is a beautiful, authentic railroad, and that galloping goose train is wild to see in person. And I was so fascinated to find out that it was a real train that actually carried passengers during the Depression in the Rockies. So I thought it was just some sort of Frankenstein vehicle that they made for the park, but no. I asked my father too, who's also a really big train buff, and he's like, yeah, the galloping goose was a common thing back in the time. Rio Grande created those, and they were pretty common. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. That's crazy. That's a wild idea. But nonetheless, that was an interesting point to the area of the park, and it's really beautiful when you get over there and you get to the Calico Mine Ride and the Calico Log Flume. These two rides, they're kind of stacked right next to each other. They are a fantastic representation of what early dark rides should look like. The Calico Mine Ride is still a beautiful ride, even to this day, it still looks so amazing. It still works exactly as it did when it was created. And the Calico log ride is probably one of the best log rides I've ever ridden. I loved that. It was so long and it had so many really fun animated scenes in it that was just reminiscent of like a ghost town feel. I loved that. Now, also over here is Silver Bullet and the Native American area. I really do believe this is a fun blend zone between other areas of the park. It kind of transitions out of the ghost town and into this Native American section because Native Americans are a big part of the history of our nation and specifically the history of the West. And so it's really good that they decided to kind of represent that at some point in the history of Knott's. Then also Silver Bullet is the roller coaster over here. I loved this ride. It was a really smooth coaster for me, and I like how it kind of goes in and out of different areas of the park. I find that fascinating, how they're able to kind of fit it right in there in the middle. But otherwise, as we go on around, the next area, as I said, is the boardwalk. As we continue deeper into the boardwalk, you start to see like what you look at, what do you see as a boardwalk. All of these rides here are wonderful. I really did like Hang Time, the Gerstlauer kind of roller coaster over here. It was really fun. Coast Rider, which is a Mack Rides Wild Mouse coaster, was also a lot of fun. And then I did the the Supreme Scream Drop Tower. That's what it was called. That was a lot of fun, and you went really high up in the air. Also, Accelerator was really great over here too. It does take up a very small piece of land because it's a kind of a really small roller coaster, but it's still a lot of fun. Also, something I neglected to mention, there's a lot of games within Knott's Berry Farm. The games section, there's a lot of arcade, a lot of midway, and they're well known for their midway prizes and their midway games. And I have a prize from one of these games. It was actually a plush Catawampas. I don't even know if they make this one anymore, but it looks like one of those I don't know, the huggable ones that you can they're like little pillow pets almost. It looks like that, but it's a Catawampas. You look at it, it looks just like a lump that you're unsure about what it means, but it's a Catawampas. It's interesting. But they have a lot of really fun prizes and fun games here that are fairly inexpensive to play, because the gaming section of the park has been really popular through the years. So they have it all over the place, in all multiple areas of the park. The next area of the park is the Fiesta Village area, which I really found as interesting. They have the spinning sombreros ride over here, which was an original to Fiesta Village. And they also have a few other areas like Soul Spin. They have the Antique Carousel, which I'll talk about that in a moment. They have Montezuma's Revenge. Now, Montezuma's Revenge was not open when I was there in last year. It also is currently still not open, and it currently is just standing but not operating as the new roller coaster. I don't really know what they plan to do with that one, but that will probably be the next big thing to open if I had any guesses. Probably since it's a Schwarzkopf, it's been under some refurb. So there's also Jaguar over here, which is a fun roller coaster. It kind of twists and turns all over the area and around the park. It actually takes up a third of the park area, which is very interesting, and I liked it a lot. And it kind of zooms through it crosses through the eye of the pyramid here in this area as well. But the Antique Carousel. Now, this is a really, really old carousel. Once I found out it was an antique Denzel carousel from the late 1800s, I was like, whoa, this is cool. But it's actually powered by lever. Even to this day, the ride operator stands in the center on the floor and pulls a lever to start the ride. That's crazy to me. You don't see lever-powered carousels very often. They do exist, but this is a very, very old design. It's a very, very early design. But the fact that this one still has a lever, like a brake lever and a regular, like a throttle lever to start and stop the carousel, is absolutely mind-blowing to me. So if you ever have time and you're here at Knott's Berry Farm, definitely ride the Antique Carousel. Lastly, the last area of the park is Camp Snoopy. Now, Camp Snoopy is really built well here. It feels like you're in a national forest. There's so many fun pine trees around the area. And then also the carriage ride, so the stagecoach, still loops this area of the park, which is beautiful in its own right. There's lots of little small rides for kids. There's a small little mini train. There's a roller coaster over here, which is a Zamperla roller coaster. All of these rides over here are fantastic, though, and really fit into the theme of Snoopy. And it's so interesting to find that this was the original Camp Snoopy. This is where the Peanuts characters began. And Camp Snoopy is the original. So it's really neat to see how once Cedar Fair got the rights to the Snoopy characters and to Charlie Brown's characters, they really ran with it in the other theme parks around the world. So it's interesting to see how that has changed. And it kind of stayed the same at the same time here in Camp Snoopy. Now, all of the rides have changed names and changed themes and been updated and redone over here quite often. I did not mention that much in the podcast or in the history area of the episode because of I just noticed it kept changing names over and over again. So I was like, I don't want to talk about that necessarily. But you can look up that information if you're interested on the Camp Snoopy rides. But yeah, that's the loop of the park. It seems like a fairly small park, but it's still fairly large. It took us a couple of days to really do everything in the park and really enjoy Knott's Berry Farm. So I highly recommend that you take a couple of days to do so yourself. And the Knott's Hotel is a beautiful stay. I mean, it's not every day you can go down to the lobby and get Knott's Boysenberry Punch right on tap at the bar, which, by the way, is a very delicious beverage they have available, and is an original beverage. Now, I'm sure the formula has changed through the years, and that the original was more like a sugar-sweetened beverage. Now it's more of a soda-type beverage, but regardless of that, it's still a lovely available offering in the park and in the resort. And you can also go to the Knott's little marketplace area, which is where you can visit Mrs. Knott's Chicken Dinner Restaurant, as well as a few other restaurants here. They have a berry patch store that has kind of like berry-themed items. They have an ice cream shop. There's so many things here, so definitely check it out. But honestly, I think that's everything at Knott's Berry Farm. So I love this park, and I cannot wait to visit again. And I hope that you'll visit soon. And that you'll take all of the history that you learned today in this episode and run with it and go and actually explore the park looking for these historical moments and these historical buildings that have been there since Walter Knott decided that he needed to keep the people happy while they were waiting to eat dinner. So it all started from that moment of, oh my gosh, I need to make a really, really interesting waiting room, to now it's this huge theme park that's on the backside of a restaurant. So it's still a fascinating story, and I love it. And honestly, I've seen a lot of similar stories in some of the fake literature in the world. Notably, the story of Disney Springs. I find it interesting how closely the story of Disney Springs resembles the story of Mrs. Knott's kind of chicken dinner restaurant. So that's an interesting correlation that I drew from this, because I know a lot about the history of Walt Disney World in general. But yeah, interesting one. Regardless, thanks for listening to this episode of the Carousel of Theme Parks podcast. Join me in just a moment as we talk about our social media platforms, etc., and the sources I used in today's video. And we'll see you on the next episode, though. Bye! Alright, so thanks for listening to this episode of the Carousel of Theme Parks podcast. I invite you to join me on all my social media channels, including Instagram, Facebook. I have a page on Facebook. I have an X account. I don't necessarily use it very much, but I use Instagram the most. So be sure to visit me there. And if you're interested in any of the podcast episodes, you can find them all on the Apple Podcasts. You can find them on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon. I'm available all over. So make sure you visit my Linktree, where you can find all of that information. As well as this episode was sourced through almost exclusively the Knott's Preserved book. You can find that on wherever books are sold. However, it was very hard for me to find this book. I ended up finding it for only about $10 over its original listed price, which was $40, so I paid out $50 for the book, but it's such a great addition to my collection. But regardless, I found it, and I was able to utilize it in this episode. There's also a lot of information available online as well if you're looking for that, but not quite to the same extent that it was available in this book. You can also find the Knott's Berry Tales Return to the Fair book, which is a find a really good, interesting book here if you're interested in looking for more about that. So there's a book on that, so you can look that one up as well. I also used in this episode a few links from the Knott's Berry Farm Wikipedia page. You can also find that link in my source description. And you can also find the full written out history and my sources on my in the show notes for this episode. So make sure you find that link as well. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode, and when we'll chat about something new. So we'll see you soon, and thanks for being patient with me as I continue to try to kind of balance this podcast with my actual real life. And I appreciate all your patronage and listening to the episodes, because that makes it a little worth it. Hopefully you learn something from every episode and then takes you with you, because that's really the goal, is to teach you something about theme parks that you already have been to or that you need to know about. So thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next ride around the carousel.